special meeting of the Judson Board of Trustees is hereby called to order at 6:30 p.m. I'm very pleased that you've taken time to join us this evening. As the Judson Board of Trustees, we are here to set goals and policies and oversee the management of the district. We are responsible for approving budgets, contracts, personnel appointments, and to listen to reports from the superintendent. We are not here to make administrative or management decisions pertaining to the daily operations of the district. This is the responsibility of the superintendent. In compliance with the State Government Code on Open Meetings, tonight's agenda has been appropriately posted. This is a meeting in public, not a meeting of the public. As our guest, you are welcome to observe and listen. These proceedings are being video and audio recorded and will become part of Judson's permanent legal record. In order that the tape adequately reflects these proceedings, please silence your mobile devices and refrain from talking while others are speaking. Since it is legally mandated that these proceedings are recorded accurately, I may have to ask for order periodically should I notice that disruptions are interfering with our recording capabilities. Once again, I extend to each of you a sincere welcome from the entire school board. Thank you for your interest in Judson ISD, and we've established a quorum. I will call roll. Ms. Rodriguez?
Present.
Ms. Pichal?
Present.
Mr. LaFoyle?
Present.
Ms. Canoyer? Oh, sorry, Ms. Canoyer?
Present.
And I'm Melinda Salinas. Thank you for coming. And we also have Dr. Carl Montoya.
Right. Present.
Yes, we will be using, but it's a public hearing first, so. Do we have any visitors or citizens to be heard? No? Okay. We will start with item 3 then, presentation of budget and proposed tax rate for the 2017-2018 fiscal year.
Mr. Elizondo, if you'll proceed, please.
Yes, sir. Board members, we're going to show you a little PowerPoint presentation here as soon as I can get it on the screen. Thank you. All righty. Seems like we're ready to go. The purpose of tonight's meeting is this first portion is a public hearing. So we're going to share some information with the board. It's really a summary of what we've been discussing over the past number of meetings regarding the budget for next school year. And it's really to give the community an opportunity to have any, if they have any questions about it or have any input that they would like to have once I'm finished with the presentation. So again, this is for the preparation of the budget for the 17-18 school year. There are some legal requirements that we have to meet, and I just want to make sure that I review those with y'all. And that you know that we do have to adopt a budget before July the 1st, so by June 30th we have to adopt a budget in order for the school district to continue open. And I'm going to continue on. If at any time you have questions, please stop me and ask me. When we prepare the budget, we look at the goals that the board has established for the school district. We ensure that we're demonstrating fiscal responsibility when we're making a recommendation to the school board on the budget that's being adopted. Our goal is always to adopt a balanced budget. Unfortunately, last year we were not able to do that, and this year I don't believe we're going to be able to do that, but we can discuss that a little further as we're going through it. And the board is required to adopt budgets for 3 different funds: the general operating fund, the child nutrition fund, and the interest and sinking fund. And I'll speak to those a little bit more as I go through the presentation. How are we funded? Districts primarily receive money through 4 funding sources. We receive state allocations, in other words, state funding, and we receive the majority of those funds through what's called average daily attendance, and that's how many kiddos are in the seats on an average every single day. And so for 17-18, if you remember, at the last meeting, we were projecting 22,100 for ADA. We've changed that forecast down a lot to 21,305, and that's based on what happened during the 16-17 school year. This particular school year, 16-17, we were thinking we were going to be closer to 22,000 in ADA, and when the final numbers came out, or preliminary, almost final numbers that are being submitted to through PEAMS to TEA, we showed that we only had 21,305 in average daily attendance, and so we're using the same forecast for next year. This is the second year that we've had a decline in our ADA. We had a decline last year in 15-16, and now in 16-17. So this is one of the reasons when we look, and I'll discuss it in a minute, when we look at state revenue, that we're seeing a decline in state revenue because our ADA is going down as well. It's not a good thing for the school district. We're going to have to get a handle on that, or we're just going to have to continue to what they, as they call, right size, make sure we have the right number of employees based on the number of students that we have in the district. The next pot of money that we receive is local taxes, and that's a large part of where we get our funding from, our local taxpayers. We do receive a little bit from the federal government and other sources like grants and things like that as well. For the general operating fund, for revenue for next year, our total revenue is we're projecting it at about $94 million. Total state about 81. So again, you can see the 94 million is the majority from our local taxpayers here mostly. And total federal taxes federal revenue, mostly it's going to be SHARS revenue that we receive, about $3.5 million. And you'll see this entry that I talk about, that's TRS on behalf, which is like the matching portion of FICA that the state pays for our TRS contributions. It's about $8.7 million for next year. So total revenue is about $187.8 million. In kind of a graph form, you'll see that local is about 50%. The state is about 43% of our revenue source. Again, this is for the general operating fund only. On the expenditure side, the majority of our budget is spent on personnel. $159 million is what we're anticipating for next year. Operational expenses is 28.7, and that TRS on behalf, the offsetting is at 8.7. So total expenditures are about 196.9 million. And we're going to get into more detail on this in the regular meeting that we're going to have after the public hearing, but those personnel costs that are reflected up there include the current staff that we have. It includes the staff for Veterans Memorial High School, the new staff that are required. It includes a few other staff members for like the T-STEM program that we're opening up next year at Wagner High School, the early college high school program. It also includes the retention incentive that was the board approved in November. That amount is in there. And I'm just kind of pointing those things out because that number does not include any raises of any kind at this point in time. Okay, so we'll talk about that again a little bit later in the meeting because we really haven't gotten to a point yet that anything's been decided about if that's going to go forward or not. So if we look at our total expenditures here, you look at in a graph form that about 81% of our budget is spent on personnel, and that 4% is TRS on behalf, and then operations is about 15% of our budget. The general operating fund, the fund balance that we're thinking we're going to end up with at the end of this school year, and it may be a little bit higher than this, but right now we're projecting about $41.4 million. Revenue for next year is about 187. The projected expenditures based on the items I discussed a minute ago without raises is about 196.8. And so we're estimating our fund balance at the end of next school year based on those numbers to be about $32.3 million. As you can see, quite a large reduction there, about $9 million if we were to adopt that budget. I'm going to keep moving. Then I'm going to jump now to the Child Nutrition Fund. This is the fund where we provide lunches for our kids and breakfast. And the majority of as you can see here from the slide, the majority of revenues that come into this fund are from the federal government for their free and reduced lunch program and breakfast. And so we receive about $10.4 million there. The total revenue for that fund is about 12.8. Of course, at the very top there, which says local, that 2.2, that's mostly all the kiddos that do pay for food, lunches going through the food line, through the lunch line. If you look at revenues in a graph form, so about 81% of our revenues come from the federal government, which is a majority, and then the local is the next one at 17%. On the expenditure side, personnel, the Child Nutrition Fund expends about $5 million, and on the expense side, approximately $7.7 million. So total expenses for that fund is about $12.9 million. Again, in graph form, operations is about 60% of their budget, and personnel is about 40% of their budget. Their fund balance at the end of this year, we're thinking it's going to be around $2.3 million. When we look at the revenue and expenditures that are being planned for them for next year, we're looking at about $2.3 million. So there's hardly no change in their funds from one year to the next, based on the budget that we're looking at for them. The Interest and Sinking Fund. This is the fund where we collect funds or monies to pay for the principal and interest payments on the bonds that we have outstanding. So it's the mortgage, if you will, on our bonds. So the majority of the monies that are used to pay for those principal and interest payments come from local taxpayers, from the property taxes. So we're looking at about $33.7 million in those local revenues, and the state helps a little bit with those, about $1 million for next year, and that number changes every year. So the total revenue is about $34.7 million. In graph form, you can see that most of it is being paid for out of the local revenue. And debt service, we are only allowed to spend those funds on one thing, and that is just paying principal and interest payments for the bonds. So the payments for next year are approximately $34.8 million. And so 100% of that is used for that. For them, the fund balance that we're thinking they're going to end at this year is about $19.3 million for the interest and sinking fund. And I do have a little note at the bottom there, just so that you don't think we have a huge fund balance just sitting in that fund. Because of the way our fiscal year ends, we have a payment that's due in August, which is outside of our fiscal year. So we have to show that even though we're collecting revenue for that, the payment is made after our fiscal year. So the true fund balance at the very beginning is really $11.8 million less than that $19 million. So you're looking more at about $8 million of a fund balance there, 7 to 8 million. And at the end of the year, even though it shows 19.2, there's an 11.7 due there as well. So you're looking at a little bit of an increase there, but it's still around an $8 to $9 million fund balance at the end of the year. And when you look at all the funds together, local revenue is about 130 million, the state about 82 million, and federal 13, TRS on behalf 8.7. As you can see, total all revenue is about $235 million for the budgets that the board will be adopting. If you look at it in graph form, again, you'll see that 55% of the revenue is coming from local taxpayers' dollars. The state's about 35%. On the expense side, personnel, again, our largest expenditure at $164.5 million. The operations are about 36. Debt service is about 35. And you can see the total is about $244.6 million. When we get to look at it in graph form, you see that 67% in this, when you look at it as a total budget, is personnel. But if you remember back to the general operating fund, it was closer, it was 81%. When you look at the total picture, our total projected revenues are $235 million. Our total projected expenditures are $244 million. So when you look at how that's going to impact our fund balances, the general operating fund, based on the budget that we've kind of been discussing, is a decrease in our fund balance of about $9 million. Child nutrition would be a decrease of about $23,000, which is really insignificant, and interest and sinking a decrease of about $62,000. Again, nothing to really worry about there. When you look at how much fund balance are we going to end up with if we were to adopt this particular budget, for the general operating fund, we would end up with $32.4 million, which is 16% of our expenditures. Now, the board established a policy that says that we have to be at 17%. That's our floor. So we really couldn't adopt this budget without making some kind of change to our board policy, or purposely saying that we know that we're going to go below what our board policy is established at 17%. The child nutrition fund is going to be at $2.3 million. And so that's 18% of the expenditures, which is fine. They cannot exceed 25%, and then because then the federal government gets involved and wants us to lower that. Interest and sinking is going to be at the adjusted amount at the bottom, $7.5 million, which is about 21% of the expenditures, which is also fine. For the tax rate, we are at this point proposing that we continue to maintain the same tax rate for the general operating fund at $1.04 per $100 of value. And the debt service fund, we're proposing that we decrease it from 43 cents to 38.5 cents. So that will be a little bit of a savings as far as tax rate to our taxpayers. So at the bottom there, it shows that the total tax rate we're going to be proposing later, it'll probably happen in August or September, is $1.425. And the reason we're able to lower that tax rate is because the values of our properties have gone up so much. So to give you an idea, there's 2 slides on this kind of information, but if somebody has a $90,000 valued home, and after they deduct the exemption, the homestead exemption that school districts grant, then the taxable value of that home is $65,000. So for this year, the taxes would be $926, as opposed to last year they were $955. So that would mean that particular homeowner would save about $29 in the year. Now, to not be misleading, obviously, that means that the value of the house had to stay at $90,000. If it increased the next year, then that's not true. We're going to show this on the next slide in a minute. And that just gives you a few more examples on the $155,000 we use in the middle. That is the average assessed value of a home at the Judson Independent School District. And last year was like 144 to 147, so it went up a little bit. And I think it's on the next slide. I'll show you in a minute as well. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. So this kind of shows you that, like, for a current year, the average home at Judson was, the taxable value was, or the assessed value was $144,000 for the current year. For next year, it's $155,000. So based on if we said that was the same house and it was valued at $144,000, now it's at $155,000, you can see that taxpayer is going to have an increase of about $108 a year in their taxes for the school district. And you can see at the bottom too that last year, or currently, our tax rate's $1.47, and we're proposing it, bringing it down to $1.42. That increase in the taxpayers at $108 is based on the lower tax rate. And again, it's just because of the change in the taxable values. That's it. That's what I have for the presentation as far as for the public hearing. And in a few minutes, we're going to talk a lot more in detail about these budgets that were presented here, if anybody has questions.
Does anyone from the public have any questions for Mr. Elizondo? You're good? Okay, meeting adjourned at 6:45, and we'll start our next one in about 10 seconds.